Woo ye, woo you, poona chara. Woo ye, woo you, poona chara. Woo ye, woo you, poona chara. Hey, did you see that freaky and messed up Taiwanese movie from 2022 called Incantation? Well, Netflix has grabbed another supernatural-ish thriller, and this time it's from Thailand. Home for Rent came out in 2023 and is now available on the streamer. So is this one going to scare the bejesus out of you, or does it just amount to a bunch of nonsensical chanting? The new tenants of a house start terrorizing the owners of the place they rent, looking for their next prey to sacrifice. Alright, so we follow a family of three with a wife, a husband, and a young daughter. And they live in a fairly large house, and the wife also owns a condo. And when they receive this generous offer to rent out their home, they decide to go for it. And the people then that move in, they are definitely not what they seem. Now, early on, I got a small The Burbs feeling. Just because the renters are intensely private, they appear sneakily from behind curtains, and just give off this sketchy vibe. But this leaves pretty quickly, and then it settles into a tense thriller. The family dynamics help to build suspense as well as dread. Growing tension between the husband and the wife, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, but for a while, I wasn't really sure why. I mean, the story's atmosphere is crafted well, and the foreboding and ominous tones don't instantly bombard us, but instead slowly simmer up, patiently increasing through odd behaviors and then strange visuals. And I love that this features visuals that are kept in the background, so that the freakouts and the willies, they don't hit everybody at the same time. I mean, some of this is like a Mike Flanagan presentation. You know, he puts dark objects way into the background, and then he just has them barely move. I mean, just enough to catch your eye, and then make your skin crawl. I think some of the plot progressions in this, they're a little obvious, especially as we hit the halfway mark. But the movie still contains several surprises that I didn't see coming. And I appreciate that the story had me focusing on one area and then blindsided me with another twist. This is also on the longer side for a horror or a thriller. It's just over 2 hours, and a lot of that is because we're told a good portion of the story, and then we're retold it from a completely different perspective. Now, some parts felt repetitive, while others filled in gaps that I didn't know existed just to make the overall narrative stronger and then more impactful. Now, the description that's listed on IMDb and even the movie poster says this is based on true events. Now, I couldn't find any sort of article or story that pointed to that. And then, given how the plot twists and turns, and then what it includes, I'd think that if this is based on something true, it's very loosely based on what actually took place. The reason I say this is because the story goes more into a supernatural space than it had started with. And this isn't a bad thing at all, because it works for the overall execution. But some of the concepts, they just don't feel as grounded, despite still being able to deliver uneasy fear. Now, I'm curious how everybody is going to react to the ending. As the twists are played out, the story takes on a very disturbing and dark angle. And it wasn't unexpected, but also it doesn't seem out of place. And because of this, and then with the trajectory of the finale, there's a lot of melancholy that we're left with. And it's kind of a depressing ending, but it's also one that fits. I mean, if all of a sudden we'd get some sort of happy ending right after everything horrendous that we just watched, it would have been just way too jolting and ultimately unsatisfying. Just be prepared that as you're taken through this emotional darkness, there is a reprieve, just not a lot of one. Now, I think what can harm the engagement the most with the story is that almost every character lacks development. We're given enough to know people superficially, but the way we connect or even become concerned is simply through circumstances where we don't want certain people to encounter danger or maybe even worse. And we do end up getting a decent amount of character background on the dad, but outside of that, everyone else receives the smallest amount of development necessary. Now, I was a bit shocked at how violent the final act of the movie becomes. We'd been shown some mildly nasty visuals in small amounts before, but once we get towards the climax, that's when it becomes gory, brutal, even grotesque. The practical effects, they're great, and even the CGI effects, they're not terrible. I mean, thankfully, those are used sparingly, but it is obvious at times when something like a blood spurt is computer generated. Then another thing, this movie isn't afraid to go into dark places that aren't going to agree with everybody. I mean, typically there are some universally off-limit actions. This one begins to skirt towards them. Now, I liked it because it drew me in even more as actions and motives became more shocking. Another thing with the visuals too, there are a few times that we are shown weird or nasty images, but they're camouflaged in what we're seeing. So we might be looking at something innocuous, but inside that is a bit of a nightmare fuel. Now, these are handled really well, and if you don't see them, they don't detract from the experience. If you do, though, they enhance the presentation. Now, this ended up surprising me and delivered more chills and unsettling feelings than I thought it would based on how the film began. And while the plot isn't unique at its core, it's executed in a way that doubles down on sinister actions to then craft a narrative that manages to shock while also creating emotional torment. The story feels a little long thanks to some repetitive sequences, and almost all of the characters receive minimal background development. But despite these, we're still presented with a suspenseful and freaky tale with an outcome you may not see coming. There's no sex or nudity, just a little profanity, and then a bunch of gruesome violence. I give Home for Rent 4 out of 5 couches. So have you seen anything recently that just made your hair stand on end? Let me know what you watched in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.